Remember the vassal spam strategy in EU5? Paradox just gave you the exact same thing in Stellaris. Yes, I know, you've been waiting for it. In the latest Nomads DLC, you play as a single ship that must build a supply network to survive. But one of the new civilization origins, specifically Heirs of the Khan, gives you the ability to create vassals from the very start of the game, who do all the work for you and provide you with supplies. And then you build a supply network across their territory. This allows you to collect tribute twice, all while having just a single ship ruling the entire galaxy. Greetings Imperialists, Lucas here. This episode is sponsored by Paradox and I'd like to sincerely thank them for that, because thanks to this, I finally have an excuse to play Stellaris again, my favorite Paradox strategy game for which I never seem to have enough time. Even though this is sponsored content, as usual I haven't received any guidelines from Paradox, so this time I'm going to mess around with the game in a very naughty way. And I'll show you just how powerful a planetless empire can be. By the way, this might be a good time to learn the game, because this mode is much easier, something like playing as an adventurer in CK3. But before we get into the episode, one important thing. The link to the Nomads DLC is in the description. If you use it and buy the DLC, I receive a solid percentage from the sale. You don't have to use my link, but if you do, you're literally contributing to the next episode. There's also currently a 20% discount on Season 10, and next weekend Stellaris will have a free weekend. You can download the game for free and try it out. And now, a question for you, since it's been a while since we had any Stellaris content. Would you like to see more videos from this game, or would you rather see more EU4 and CK3 as I originally planned? I have to admit, this menu artwork is probably one of the better ones we've had in Stellaris recently, that wandering fleet against the backdrop of a gas giant. Although in the actual game, the proportions of that arc are a bit different. If you don't know what Stellaris is, in short, it's a 4x game. However, a few things set it apart from the competition. Thanks to the enormous number of options, you can create virtually any empire you can imagine. Yes, tentacles included. And if you don't have an idea for a nation, don't worry. There's also a massive list of pre-made civilizations, although I've personally never played any of them. And I've already spent quite a bit of time in Stellaris. The game also has a huge number of events and stories to discover. But best of all, you don't even have to read them yourself. Zira can do it for you. Just enable text-to-speech in the accessibility options, it will use whichever voice you have set in Windows. I genuinely don't understand why this isn't standard in all Paradox games. And most importantly, a gazillion DLCs, which means yes, the game is still actively developed, and receives tons of additional content over time. Instead of being abandoned like many games in this genre, moving on to the gameplay, I've already created the Smiling Khanate, where I'm playing as one of the most bloodthirsty species in Stellaris lore, the Titinaki. The origin of this civilization is Heirs of the Khan, which is one of the 4 new origins. An origin is essentially a unique backstory that initially defines every empire, granting access to unique traits and mechanics, in our case, that will be the Ark, as well as the ability to create satrapies from conquered peoples. As for government and species ethics, the Smiling Khanate are militarists. My ships make bigger boom booms, with a touch of spirituality mixed in for cheaper edicts. Additionally, I chose to play a nomadic civilization, meaning I cannot settle planets, and many game mechanics have been altered for me. I'll talk more about that later in the video. At the head of the nation I placed an emperor, although if someone wants to, they can even have a democracy. My civilization is also characterized by having incredible admirals, bigger boom booms, and being a feudal society, which should make managing vassals easier, although I also considered taking the diplomatic corps. Maybe that'll be my third civic. The species itself can also be customized extensively, there are truly a lot of traits available. Without going into too much detail, I picked ones that would help me survive with limited living space. After all, I only have one arc, more specifically a military arc named Bob. In general, there are 3 types of arcs. But I'm here to make things go boom. Sure, there are many more setup options, but I've shown you the most important ones, there are simply too many. And finally, I can start the game, which will ultimately be played with these settings. Yes, there are quite a few of them, a bit of lore that you can listen to, and before our eyes appeared this rather not particularly beautiful star system, because our sun is a black hole. And on the strategic map you can see that I spawned on the edge of the galaxy. And yes, I know Stellaris isn't exactly a beautiful game graphically, because most of my time will be spent looking at this screen, dots, lines, and even more dots and lines, rather than views like these, unfortunately. First, scientific research. I prioritize research bonuses whenever they're available. If not, I take anything military related. Next, I send my Ark to explore neighboring systems. The Ark has this icon. At the beginning, it's usually a good idea to do exploration only with the Ark, because one of the starting objectives is typically exploration itself, but not this time. These objectives are mainly there to familiarize you with the Ark's unique mechanics, such as unlocking damaged districts, removing the debuff you start with, and gathering resources. Now I send my second science ship to explore, it's this icon. And finally, I have, normally, I would call it a construction ship, because it would be responsible for building new star bases that claim systems for us, or for constructing mining stations. Right now, however, it's more of a supply ship. And the only things it can build in systems are supply stations that collect resources from each system. This ship can also gather resources from a system directly, although this one has already been looted. But one of this ship's most important tasks is precisely collecting resources from supply stations and delivering them to the mothership, so for now there's not much for it to do. For me, one of the best changes has to be how fast the game runs now. I'm genuinely shocked. Oh, the Cybrex, awesome! A ring world that I won't be able to occupy. Normally, I'd be very excited about that. This starts an event chain where we learn the history of this long-fallen civilization. Very quickly, I also receive a contract to complete, similar to those in Crusader Kings. The starting tasks are fairly simple, mostly find and destroy. If I discover other civilizations, they'll be able to offer me different kinds of contracts, whether that's espionage or find and destroy. It's possible that, much like in CK3, it heavily depends on which civilization you're playing. As for what kind of contracts you'll encounter most often, contract completed without much trouble. And now I can choose traditions of my civilization. For my first choice, I'm going with discovery. It's very important for me to find other civilizations as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, I can also start expanding the Ark, or rather, first remove all these unnecessary districts, which I would normally do using money. Except Arks work a little differently, and there's no distinction between energy credits and minerals inside them. Both of those resources are converted into reserves, and depending on how many reserves the Ark has, it receives different bonuses, which I can further influence through the Ark's stance. And honestly, my favorite stance is burning reserves. It gives massive bonuses to technicians and researchers, and it's absolutely critical to avoid the penalties from running out of reserves. Then I'll expand the generator district and the mining district. As it happens, I have some unemployed population, and they need jobs somewhere. Supply levels are also a problem early in the game. To speed up exploration even further, I enact an edict in the government for faster exploration. A little later, I fully explored the Altair system. And honestly, it's incredibly powerful for scientific research. So now my supply ship will build a way station here. After that, the supply ship can collect resources from the system, especially since there are substantial resources here. But that wouldn't actually be a good idea, because the downside of this approach is that it reduces the way station's resource output for a full 20 years. So in short, wherever I'm collecting resources through a way station, I'm not collecting them with the supply ship. And not with the Ark either, because it can do that as well. Once a way station is built, you need to construct the appropriate modules on it, each of which allows you to collect something different from the system. Way stations can then be upgraded later. At the beginning, I want scientific research and mineral collection. Actually, I want to acquire a good amount of gas with my supply ship as quickly as possible, because then I'll be able to enact a certain decision that will strengthen my vessel. I continue upgrading the ship itself. The more reserves it starts consuming, the faster those stockpiles will decrease, so you have to keep an eye on that. The resources gathered by my supply ship can either be delivered to the Ark immediately, or I can wait until the cargo hold is full. By the way, I just found another excellent system. Resources are transferred to the Ark almost instantly once the transport ship enters the system. A little later, through the ship management interface, I also ordered a construction of another science ship, because I already have quite a few anomalies to investigate, and only science ships can do that. After several years, I've built a network connecting multiple way stations. Initially, it provides fairly small bonuses, but the longer the network becomes and the more modules it contains, the greater the bonuses. Of course, you can also build way stations in different locations that aren't connected to one another, but that's generally a rather annoying solution. And shortly afterwards, I can choose my first Ascension perk, something that will heavily define my civilization's playstyle. This DLC also introduces a new perk, Wanderlust, but it won't be useful for me. Instead, I'll take shared destiny, because it's extremely useful when you plan to have vassals. And essentially, that's what the first 20 to 30 years of gameplay will consist of, at least until I discover another civilization. I need to explore, gather resources, research new technologies, and provide reserves for my arc, and from time to time, complete a contract as well. It took me 20 years to find my first civilization. Actually, I found a few more than that, but most of them are very far away, and I have no idea how I even know about them. My first future vassal, however, is currently the Galactic Curators, essentially a group of space historians, museum curators, something along those lines. And they probably won't pose much of a challenge, so I attack them immediately, with the goal of turning them into a tributary. My arc is ready, supported by no fewer than 2 fleets. For now, they're made up of corvettes, using the automatic ship design because honestly I have no idea what's currently good in Stellaris, so I'm relying on the auto designer. But if you want to give me some advice, feel free to leave it in the comments. I've upgraded the entire arc with additional armor plating and shields, to make it more resilient, because if it gets destroyed, that's game over. By the way, I also noticed something really cool. This artwork and what's displayed on it changes depending on which system our arc is currently in or what it's doing at that moment, jumping and changing stars. A very nice little detail, I love things like that. The arc itself also has some weaponry, unfortunately it's mostly point defense guns, and relatively few fighter hangars, but it gets the job done. Seriously, I forgot to assign the fleet to follow Boob. That was actually very stupid, because if the arc gets damaged, it affects the productivity of the entire civilization. A little later, I encountered the first enemy fleets. They're not numerous, but they do have frigates, which are dangerous against large ships, because they're usually equipped with torpedoes that bypass shields and deal increased damage to hulls. I'll be scanning the wreckage left behind by my enemies, which can grant me both resources and technologies. Because right now, my technological situation is really rough. Unfortunately, there also weren't any particularly interesting systems nearby from a technological standpoint. Well, except for this one, the stations don't stand much of a chance against me either, mainly because the second tradition I adopted was supremacy. It's a strictly military tradition that has a major impact on my ships and the damage they deal. Boom boom! After a few years, the entire civilization was effectively under my occupation. However, for the campaign to be successful, I still needed to conduct a ground invasion. So first I had to build an army, and once it was ready, it simply carried out the invasion. Although there weren't many enemy armies left by that point, and now they've agreed to surrender. The entire civilization is now my vassal. What does that mean? By default, they transfer as much as 30% of their basic resource production to me, which I immediately convert into reserves. These contracts can be modified and renegotiated to obtain much higher percentages, but I have to wait 60 months before doing so. There are several different types of subject relationships. For me, the most important one will be the Satrapy, which is unique to my origin. Satrapies transfer a full 30% of their naval capacity to me, which will allow me to maintain truly massive limits in the future. By acquiring my first vassal, I essentially break the entire arc supply mechanic, because I'll never run out of reserves again. Now I'll focus on finding additional targets, as well as redesigning my arc since I no longer need basic resources. It's also possible to raid a vassal's territory and collect resources from it. For now, I won't be building way stations there because I've reached my limit, so I can't yet connect the system to the vassal's territory, but that's only temporary. After 5 years, I renegotiate the tribute terms, so that I receive a bit of everything, though I'm particularly interested in scientific research. For now, because they don't exactly like me, I can't demand any more from them. Fortunately, I found a new target. This time it's a theocratic oligarchy, and I think it's time for us to get to know each other a little better. And that was another short war. 5 years, and I got myself another vassal under my boot. But the best part is that it led to the discovery of yet another civilization. In fact, I discovered even more civilizations because the galactic community was founded. And now, with each of its members, I do the following. I exchange communications, which allows me to establish diplomatic relations with every civilization known to them. Additionally, if possible, I'll try to obtain sensor data from them, which will reveal their map to me. In return, I only give them alloys. And this one's for you. I've got quite a stockpile of it. After a few more diplomatic exchanges, I can already see a significant portion of the galaxy. New types of contracts have also become available. But before I continue my journey, I need to think about how to further expand the route. that supplies my fleet. So I need to change a few things. Ideally, I should connect the capitals of my first 2 vassals, especially since I've already increased my limit substantially. I can now also upgrade my way stations to tier 2, but I'm not doing that everywhere because unfortunately I will be dismantling some of those way stations shortly. Thanks to these 2 vassals, I should have a reliable supply network for conquering the rest of the galaxy, and that's exactly what I'm preparing for. Mainly by building a 3rd fleet and strengthening the existing ones. When it comes to way stations built in my vassal systems, it's very important to construct this module. It allows you to collect all resources produced in that system, including those produced by the planet itself, which means I also receive research points. And unfortunately, just when I was about to launch my attack and my fleets were already in position, this happened. My hull cracked, and now I have to repair it. Because I am suffering massive penalties to everything, and honestly, I don't intend to spare any resources, because the subsequent penalties are extremely severe. To repair the ship faster, I make additional adjustments, because the situation is getting worse. So I even pulled my Ark back to the supply line, so it could gather resources as quickly as possible. Fortunately, there's only one final effort left, and there it is, the Ark has been saved, and in the process it has become more resilient as well. And after another few years, I acquire several more vassals, or rather tributaries. But thanks to that, truly enormous amounts of reserves are now flowing to me. And the only thing I'm struggling with is trade. I'm certainly not going to run out of basic resources. Since a fairly long period of peace seems to be ahead of me, I'm heading toward a way station that's collecting resources for me here. Because in a moment I'll be connecting the entire system to it as well. And honestly, if you look at it this way, about 1/3 of the galaxy is already under my control. And only about 70 years have passed. But more importantly, I'm currently researching advanced relay technology. First of all, it unlocked tier 3 way stations. But more importantly, I'll now be able to place a logistics hub within the network. It allows resources from the entire network to be accumulated and then transferred either to the Ark or to supply ships. So yes, my supply ships will no longer have to fly up and down the line transporting resources to me. Which they weren't keeping up with anyway, if you look at it. Instead, it's enough for either my Ark or my supply ship to be present in that system, and they'll collect everything from it. Meanwhile, I also researched technology that upgrades the Ark itself, because regardless of type, every Ark has 3 upgrade levels. And look, the logistics hub has been built, and now I'm pulling resources from the entire network. Thanks to that, there are times when I don't receive 6 physics research points, but rather 246. And the most beautiful part is that I have a permanent penalty to everything. Research costs and so on. A flat plus 100% penalty simply because I'm a spaceship. And the more vassal systems I connect, the more of everything I'll receive. When my ship upgraded to tier 2, I gained access to new system adaptations and modules. I'll add a fleet academy, and I'll make my ship more resilient after all. As for the modules, I'll add a grand archive. And for now, I'll also add more hangars for my fighters. They used to be very powerful, and the Ark itself became twice as strong. Imagine my surprise when I discovered that with technological progress and the Ark upgrade, I gained access to additional districts, which not only produce resources but also provide bonuses to the Ark. And honestly, this one looks very good. It should strengthen my Ark tremendously. Building the archive effectively means I can now activate every artifact I own, because I don't pay for them, my vassals do, and I still receive all the bonuses from those artifacts. I may not have found any exceptionally powerful ones, but it's still something. The next 10 years were spent strengthening the Ark and my fleets. At this point, the Ark is basically my 4th fleet. So now I'm setting out to conquer more weak species. At the same time, while I'm waging wars over there, my supply ships will be constructing a new hyper-relay network. A sort of space highway, just without the highway. First, I'll build it along my way station network, and then through my vassals' territory, connecting their capitals, all the way to their borders so my fleets can move around quickly. After several more conquests, I was earning so much and so quickly that I wasn't merely researching new technologies anymore, I was practically spamming them. But most importantly, I upgraded the Ark to tier 3. And now I can install a special module on the Ark that either turns it into a powerful shipyard or gives me an absolutely massive gun. I know what you're all hoping for. Of course I'm taking the big gun. If you take a closer look at the Ark now, you can actually see the weapon right here in the center. Wow, that gun turned the Ark into an absolute monster. The second thing I installed on my ship was a set of special extraction tools that allow it to literally strip mine a planet's mantle, extracting enormous quantities of resources, ripping chunks out of the crust itself, although sadly planets don't explode this time. and then you can simply move on to the next one. But honestly, it's an incredibly good source of strategic resources, which is exactly what I'm struggling with. My ship has become so powerful that I actually want to test it against a legendary space dragon. So I jump in, and two mighty beasts face one another. Although face one another might be a bit too literal in this case, that legendary and mighty dragon couldn't even break through my shields, so it didn't so much as scratch my hull. Eventually it fell. And at almost the exact same moment, I finished building my highway system to subjugate even more empires. I literally just finished a highway spanning the galaxy, so my fleets can now move incredibly quickly. And off they went, very quickly. The targets ahead are a bit tougher now, entire federations. But thanks to my gigantic gun, just look at how fast those stations were falling. In this particular war, the worst part was that I had to bombard practically every planet in order to weaken the armies defending them. Since when do AI empires build ground armies? All the worse for the planets, because I completely devastated them. But it turned out that even though the enemy had stronger fleets than usual, they were still far weaker than mine. And my super weapon literally one-shots entire fleets. So since they were that weak, I ultimately decided to split my fleets and advance in 4 directions at once. That allowed me to finish subjugating another vassal much faster. The best thing about conquering this empire is that they had already built their own highway network, which I immediately connected to. And honestly, I'm wondering how to connect this system to my network. Wow, I became powerful enough that some nations even agreed to become my vassals peacefully. All it took was a slight improvement in relations. At this point, the vast majority of the galaxy is under my boot. I have an absurd number of vassals, providing me with a gigantic naval capacity bonus, almost 2000. I don't even know if I'll be able to use all of that. And do you know what's the best part? I could build many more ships as well. But why bother when one ship is enough to control the galaxy? More importantly, I can now take my revenge and fulfill my destiny. I'm simply going to destroy the other Khan clans. I waited this long because their systems are heavily fortified, and once again I forgot to send my fleets along with the Ark, but surprisingly the Ark handles it just fine. It's destroying everything by itself. I honestly didn't expect it to be possible to build such a powerful ship so early, one that's essentially equivalent to an endgame behemoth. Then, after capturing the outlying systems, I decided to attack the main system, where somewhere around here is the flagship of the Khan leader. Oh, I think it just went boom boom. And the humiliated clans approached me, asking me to become their leader. Literally, I am the Great Khan now. Wow. Who immediately transformed all of his vassals into satrapies. Oh no, that reset all my settings. Well, I'm screwed. I also received new casus belli that I can use even against fallen empires. Let me know in the comments how you liked this Stellaris episode and whether you're planning to buy the DLC. If you are, I'd of course appreciate it if you used my link, and if not, that's perfectly fine too. And here you can watch my EU5 video where I play Portugal as a colonial power and show how to make colonies extremely profitable, turning tiny Portugal into the strongest country in Europe.